FlutterFlow provides fantastic support for create, read, update and delete operations within our Supabase database. That is great, but one thing that FlutterFlow will struggle at unless you write lots of logic and code inside FlutterFlow is to make business level decisions based on that data really easy. So what we do is we call out to a service such as BuildShip that provides us this fantastic tool set for us to be able to make these business level decisions, and we can then return that back to FlutterFlow in order for it to carry on with all of its presentation magic that it would normally do. And the other good thing about this as well is we want to maintain security as well. So if you're using things like row level security within inside your Supabase database, we want to make sure we pass that through into BuildShip for it to then call out to Supabase and then obviously then return that back in a more secure way. And finally, by using something like BuildShip, we can keep our API keys secure within inside the platform. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Let's start having some fun with BuildShip and let's get cracking. Okay, so let's put a scenario on the table then. Now, this is something that would not be uncommon to other types of applications where you need to break out from FlutterFlow to make some business level decision on your data and then return back the result back to your FlutterFlow application. So let me present you then a hairdresser's booking application where the user has authenticated, they're logged in, and they want to choose the next available appointment. They want to find out when their stylist is available next. They hit the next available appointment button. It will then make an API request out into your BuildShip workflow. It will pass in the staff ID. The BuildShip workflow will then go through a series of decisions and then return back a positive result back to your FlutterFlow application. Now, of course, the positive result might be a negative result. It may be that there is no appointments available. We need to handle that too within inside the BuildShip workflow. So this particular video, we're going to carry through that particular set of steps within inside the BuildShip workflow, just to kind of show you how you can quite simply make business decisions, hopefully without writing much code at all. And then, of course, hopefully you can then take these concepts into your own FlutterFlow applications that's using BuildShip to do something very similar. So without further ado, let's get into the video and let's start getting our hands dirty with inside BuildShip. Okay, so here we are then in BuildShip, and you can see here that I've got pretty well much an empty workspace to work in. I've got no workflows on the left-hand side. The first thing that we're going to want to do is, because this application is going to be using Supabase, we're going to need to set up some keys and some URLs within inside the application so we can then use those within inside our workflow. So what I'm going to do is, with the basic project all created, I'm going to move over to the cog here, just select that, and of course here I've got this option called secret keys. Now, we need to create two keys here, one for the URL of the API that it's going to call out to within inside Supabase, and we're going to need to keep hold of that key within inside here as well, because we need to pass that along with our actual requests so we can identify the database that we're actually connecting to on the Supabase side. So let's now first add a key. So let's add the secret key. Now I'm going to call this one Supabase URL, like that. I'm going to move over to Supabase. This is the database that I've actually got here. I've selected the settings down here. I've gone to API, and this is the bit that we need up here. So I'm just going to copy this URL, just go back to BuildShip. Let's just paste that into the secret value here, hit save. Okay, so then next up, once that's been persisted, is hit add secret. Let's call this one Supabase API key, just like that. Move back over to the API settings here. Go down to this one here, the project API keys, hit the copy, go back to BuildShip, and let's just paste that in there and hit save. So those are now created for us. We can now then use these now with inside the node that will be then used for Supabase callouts to the database. So we'll come back and configure these in just a moment. So here I am then in FlutterFlow, and you can see this is the scenario that I've actually got running here. So a user would be logged in at this particular point. They'll click on book appointment, and then here I can choose different members of staff here. I'm going to choose Katie here, and I'm going to choose an appointment type. Now this is not really used with inside this particular flow, but I'm just going to choose a basic cut. And this is the bit that's quite important, is this little search option here. Now this option here will allow me to choose a date for the appointment, but here, this is what's going to allow me to call out to the BuildShip workflow. So I would just hit the little search option here, away it goes, and it's now found an available appointment for me, which is at 9:30. So let me show you what that actually looks like from a database perspective, and I'm just going to bring up some slides to show you what this looks like. Okay, so let's have a look then at the table then that we're going to be checking against inside our workflow. You can see here, this is just a simple representation of the table. It's called booking with inside my Supabase database. You can see I've got a staff ID, I've got a Boolean column called booked, and I've got a date column as well, which represents all of the future dates that my stylists are available to be booked. Now in my database table, I have, a number of rows that contains all of the future dates and times that each staff member is available. So for example, staff ID 1 has the next schedule for the next sort of few days or the next week or anything like that. They're already there in separate rows, which are all represented by half hour increments. Okay, so 9 o'clock, 9:30, 10 o'clock, etc. for every single staff member. And in this particular application, that allows an administrator to be able to kind of preload the database with all of the future appointment times that that particular staff member actually has available. So you can see here that Katie, which is staff ID 1, is booked currently for 9 o'clock in the morning. So that's not an appointment that we would be interested in if we're trying to find the next available appointment. Of course, you can see in this particular example that Katie is next available at 9:30. So that's the one that we are looking for within inside our application. So it's a very, very simple scenario, but let's now move back over to BuildShip and let's now work through the workflow to get hold of that particular availability so we can then return it back to our application. Okay, so back in BuildShip, let's create our first workflow. Let's hit the little plus here, and then we can give it a name up here. We can just double click and then find next appointment. So something like that, press enter. Now what we need to do within our actual workflow here is this is going to be invoked by an API call. So the first node that we want to actually hit is the REST API call. It's automatically selected by default because it's probably the most common within inside BuildShip. Hit add trigger, and there it is. It's all ready to take receipt of our request from FlutterFlow. So I'm going to give this a name. So I'm going to call this one find appointment like that. Just press enter there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to now change the method here, because what we're going to do is we're going to be performing a post request from FlutterFlow into this API call. So let's just choose post. Now, when we do a post request, we're going to pass in the values with inside the request actually into this API call. So what we now need to do, we need to configure that up with inside here. So let's hit the little three dots we just got up here. Let's hit edit. And then here we are into this particular section. Now we need to head over to the request tab that's just here. So just choose that. And you can see here, these are the type of sections we now need to configure. So we're going to now add the staff ID into body. That's the first thing that we're going to do. So let's just select body, hit the little plus here, click the rename output, and let's give this a key. So this is going to be just staff ID, just like that. And then the label can be anything we like, but I'm going to be more descriptive and say this is a staff ID here. So this value is what is going to be within inside the actual post request from FlutterFlow. You want to make sure that you actually get the name of this absolutely correct. Okay. And then this is going to be an ID. We're not going to be bringing a string in here. So this is going to be of number. So that's quite important to choose the right type. And then we also need to pass in a header in here as well. So if your application is using row level security, that you've locked down your database, then you need to make sure that you pass the actual token that's going to be the authenticated user actually into this particular REST call. So we need to add that in here. In this particular case, I'm going to add it in here. So just with it selected, just hit plus here, choose the rename output, and I'm just going to give this a name of authorization like that. And I'm just going to copy that here, and I give the label the same thing, but just with a uppercase A, just like that. Now, of course, that's going to be a string because it's going to be passing in a bearer token actually into this request. Okay, so now we just need to hit the save option just up there, and that will now be presented back to the canvas, and we can now start creating the next node. Okay, so this is where we can use the power of BuildShip AI to generate a node for us. Now, the node that we need it to generate for us is to actually get today's date. We want that date to be formatted just how we want it to be, and we want it to be from midnight on today's date. So how do we do that? Well, quite simply, we just hit the little plus here. We can then go over and select the generate with AI node, just choose that. Now, this brings up this particular dialog, and this allows us to be now quite descriptive over the AI generated node that we need it to be. So my experience so far of BuildShip is to be as descriptive as you possibly can. If what it generates is not quite right, then you can use AI again to make some changes to the node that is actually generated. So I'm going to put in here a kind of a statement here that we actually want it to consider. So we need this node to kind of generate today's date. We want it to be this specific format, and we want the time to be from midnight. So it's pretty clear cut what I need it to generate. Let's hit the generate option. It's going to maybe take sort of 10, maybe 20 seconds for it to generate this particular node for us. And then hopefully we can then test that to see the output. So there it is. It's all set. It was that quick, which is great. Hit the little option that we just got up here. And then this allows us to now test this particular node. Now this is the code that's actually generated. Now, of course, if you are not a coder, then don't worry about it. But generally we want to quickly test this. So we can hit the little test node option just up here. That node is going to be tested and the result will be presented on the right hand side here. And hopefully we're looking for today's date, which is the 26th of November. And we want the timestamp to be from midnight. So let's see what it generates. There it is. It looks like it's formatted the date just how we want it. Now we can now use this result now in future nodes within inside our BuildShip workflow. So we can just hit the little save up here, and then our node is all ready to rock and roll. So that's great. That's all set for us now. We can now then move on to the next node to then pick up that particular value. Just one little bit of a tip here. You want to try to actually name your nodes something quite descriptive and meaningful to exactly what it's actually doing. So you can just double click up here and you can then sort of delete this out here. And I'm just going to say get today's date, just something like that. Now, the reason why that's important is because when your nodes or your workflow becomes quite complex, you're going to want to reference these by their name. So you're going to want it kind of, this list is going to be built and you're going to be able to then select the node that you're interested in. And by keeping it meaningful and descriptive, then you're easily going to be able to reference those when you're referencing other nodes within inside nodes. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so this is where it gets all a bit more interesting now, because we are now going to use a node that we can actually apply to our workflow, and we can then configure it to then make a call out to our Supabase database. So this is really straightforward again, but it requires a little bit more configuration, but I'll show you how all of that works. Let's just move over here and hit plus. Now we're going to want to now look for a Supabase node. So choose a Supabase here as an integration option. We can scroll down here. We can look to see what we need. Now we're going to want to make a call out now to Supabase. We're going to pass in our staff ID. We're going to pass in the date that we're interested in with some further filtered parameters on the request to then hopefully return back that booking that is available to us. So here we've got this one called Get Supabase row. Let's hit add. Okay, so you can see now that we've kind of got all of the kind of required fields are all kind of like highlighted for us that we actually need to pass in. So the API key is what we configured earlier on, and as well as the API URL as well. So it's going to be quite straightforward. Hit the little pen here, choose the secrets option. We need to choose the Supabase API key and then just click away, and that's then applied. The URL, we just want to choose secrets and choose the URL option, and then we've both got those two configured. So they're going to be passed in through the request. Now the table name in my particular case, in this particular example, the table in my Supabase database is called booking, and then the token that I want to pass in, if you remember back when we configured this REST API call, we created a header value that we could then pass in here as by our token. So let's just choose the little pen again. Let's go to the variables option this time. You can see here this allows us now to drill down into our particular nodes that we've got. Now this is the request, it's the very first one. Choose the little forward arrow here, select that, and we're going to want to choose the request header, and we want to pass in the authorization. So just choose authorization, click away, and then that's now applied here. Now, with this particular node, there's one slight change that we need to make with what we actually have as out-of-the-box functionality within inside BuildShip. We need to press the little code option here, select that. Now, we're passing in from FlutterFlow the actual token as well as the term bearer. Okay, now that's what gets passed in. We don't actually want to pass that in here, otherwise we're going to end up with kind of bearer, which is what we don't want. So we just want to delete out bearer here, because our token that we're actually passing in here is now going to be the full bearer and then the actual token itself. So we just need to make sure that we set that. Hit save. So that's all set for us. And then next up, we now need to configure this actual filter, because this is now going to reference the table and the token that we're going to pass in. But now we're going to be left now without the ability to actually now filter down to the actual rows that we're interested in. Now this opens up then a whole level of other options which we now need to sort of briefly talk about. Okay, so what we now need to do with inside BuildShip itself is make that filtered request out into Supabase via the API. Now, what we're seeing on the screen at the moment is the documentation that it's going to allow you and support you with the additional information you need in order to apply these filters. So what's going to happen is you're going to make this request out of Supabase, you're going to pass these filters in, and then of course Supabase is then going to return back with the result based on those actual filters. So what you can see on screen at the moment is kind of like the documentation we need to have a look at. Now really, this is kind of all that FlutterFlow is actually doing under the covers for you when you're actually applying all of those filters when you're making Supabase requests. So what we now to do is we need to do something very, very similar with inside BuildShip in order to get back the data that we need. So what we're going to do is in the next little segment, we're just going to build up this filter request, which is going to look something like this here. We're going to put this together to how we want in order to get to the data that we need with inside our Supabase database. And of course, then that data is going to return back and we can then do what we want to do with that particular data. So please do go and check the link in the description because it references this. There's lots of examples in this particular page here that you can then use depending on your own use cases with inside your own FlutterFlow projects. Okay, so back within BuildShip then, within inside our Get Supabase row node, let's choose the filter option just here. Let's just make this a little bit bigger by choosing the expand option here. Okay, so let's now work this out. So what we're going to do is let's now type in what the actual filter needs to be. So again, refer back to that documentation I just showed you. So what we're going to do is we are looking for a date, okay, and the date needs to be greater to or equal, and then we need to put a little dot here, and this is where we now need to represent the actual variable that we've actually got on our previous node. So what we would do is we just go to variables here, we go to get today's date. So again, this is what I said earlier on about making sure your names are descriptive, because of course as you get really lots of nodes here, you're going to find you're going to get quite a big list. So we're going to choose the get today's date, and you can see here now we're going to get a little bit of a change here. It's going to convert to JavaScript. We've got some backticks in here now, but this is still going to mean the same. So we're referencing this particular variable. So we now know that the text will be date equals greater to or equal to dot, and then the date will actually be added in there as well. So again, just like the reference material that you saw on that previous segment, we now need to put an ampersand in here because we're now going to pass in another value into this. We now need to say a staff, okay, now underscore ID. So this is the column name within inside the Supabase database. I'm going to say equals, and this is where we now need to say is equal, so EQ dot, and again we now need to reference again another variable here. So just choose the variable here, but this time of course we've passed in the staff ID actually into this workflow. So just choose the little arrow forward here. We're going to go into the body and we're going to pick out the staff ID. So just select that, and that's going to be applied here. Now we do also need to, you can see that it's kind of not the same as here, so we do need to actually apply a dollar symbol and curly open brace, and we're just going to go to the end here and just drop that in there. So we just need to make sure that we include those in. We did have a little warning that was just here. I'll just delete that one out. You can see here if I just probably click away. In fact, let me just delete this one out. Let me just delete those out again so you can kind of see that. There it is. That little warning's come up there. So it's just reminding you there to wrap the variable with the dollar symbol and then the braces as well. So just going to put that back in. There it is. Okay, so we now want to extend out the query a little bit further. So put an ampersand in here. Just say booked. Okay, then is an equal sign, and we want to say EQ dot false like that. So we want to make sure that we have a column called booked, that we want to make sure that anything that we've got to come back to here is equal to false. And then finally, there's one more that we need to put in here. And again, look at the documentation for this one as well, but we want to limit this to one single row coming back there. So I put an ampersand limit in there is equal to 1. That's great. And then that will mean we'll only get one record back if one exists. And then one final thing that we need to do is we need to actually order this list. Okay, so you can put another ampersand in here and we can say order equals date. So this will just ensure that by default here, when we make these queries, everything will be in ascending order first, and then that is enough there in our filter to then pass in via the API as part of the GET request in order to return that data back. So hopefully that's going to work for us, but we can now hit the, in fact, just click away here like that, and that filter will be all set for us just there. Okay, so there's a number of different ways that we can test with inside BuildShip. And you can either test the full workflow or you can actually test an individual node. Well, in this case, we're just going to test an individual node. So let's click on the little code option that is just here. And what we can do is we can actually now fill out these parameters here on the left-hand side in order for us to actually test this particular node. So it's quite a good thing that actually when you're trying to work out your filters and make sure they're working okay, instead of actually creating like we did earlier as one complete set, you can actually build them up with inside this particular section here. So we're going to quickly test this. Let's now put the token in. We need to pass in a valid token because I have row level security on my particular database. I'm going to pass the token in. So quite simply, I'm going to move it over to my application here. This is the application running inside FlutterFlow. I'll just press F5 with inside Google. I've just logged in. I'm just going to hook on to a request that's being made here. And I'm just going to scroll down here. Make sure you've got a network tab selected, by the way. And then we just want to pull out the actual bearer token here. So I'm just going to select all of this, just copy that to the clipboard, move back over to BuildShip. I'm just going to pass that into the actual token. So I now got my token. Now, if I was just now to fire this up, if I hit test node, we should see a result come back from the database. It'll probably be more than one record. It likely will be because we've not sort of narrowed down on the filter. So it's going to take a moment to execute. Okay, so there we go. You can see I've got a number of rows that's coming back from my table. Now, this is where our filter now needs to come into play here now to narrow down on these particular results. So with that in mind, let's just hit the little save option. Let's go back to the actual filter that we actually created here. So just select the little filter. I'm just going to do a Control or Apple A here and just copy that. And I'm just going to go back into the actual test here again. Okay, just go up to the filter here. Let's just click the little pen. Let's just paste that actually in here like that. Now it's going to come up with some errors here. We want to clear those off. So let's just sort of delete those out. We're not interested in those, and we'll come back and we'll just fill those in. In fact, this one here is going to be our staff ID, which is going to be equal to 1, as which we had before. And then we can just now go to where it says greater to or equal to, and we can now put in the actual date to represent the formatted date that we did earlier on. So that's 2023. I'm going to do a dash, and it's going to be the 11th month, and it's going to be the 26th today. And I'm just going to do the midnight timestamp. So there we go. That is midnight, and that should be all that we need to do to test our node. So if I just click away now, if I hit the little test node option, I'm hopeful now that we're just going to get that single result come back, which pretty well much means our filter is working as we want it. And there it is. It's come up on the right hand side. That is what we're now interested in making a decision on further in more nodes. So let's now go and do that now. Let's extend out this workflow. And by the way, that's the most complex bit of this workflow. So we can now move on to the more simple stuff. Let's go. So the next node that we are going to create is really just a very, very simple node in terms of working out whether we actually have any rows coming back from Supabase or we do not. If we have something in there, we need to return a true, but if we don't, we need to return back a false. And the reason why we need to do that is because we need to return back to FlutterFlow either the future appointment, or we want to return back a 400 sort of status message to say that there's no appointments available. So we can do that really, really simple. And you can do this either programmatically, of course, or you can use the power of AI with inside BuildShip to do the kind of node creation for us. But we're going to use the power of AI because we're trying to minimize the amount of coding that we're doing here to show you how AI can really support you in building your workflows. So just hit the little plus. We're going to generate with the AI, and we're going to now paste it in a statement here, which is what we're looking for. I need a node that returns true if my input list contains an item, otherwise return false if it is empty. So hit the generate. So there we go. So the node is being created. You can see now that it's looking for a list. So we can quickly test this out. So let's click on the node option here, the node editor. Let's quickly test this out. So here is my test data here on the left hand side. Choose that. Let's just create an array. Now, of course, again, if you're programmers, you kind of know here what we're actually doing. But I'm just going to put like a test in here and then just put the value of 1. Now that's just representing an entry within inside our array. So of course, if I can just hit the little test node option here, so we should get a true come back as a result. So there we go, we've got the true that's come back. Of course, I can go back in here now. I can remove the entry from the list here. So this just represents an empty list. Hit the test node and we should get back a false. There we go, so we've got the false back. So that's all working for us. Just hit the save. Okay, so back on the canvas, let's give this a name, get appointment, something like that here. Let's now pass in the result of this actually into this particular list now to get that true or false decision. So just choose the little pencil here. Now we want to click on the variables here and actually choose the get appointment. Okay, so just select that. That's nicely then loaded. And of course, when that now plays out, that will have a value. So that will then return back a true result. And we can now, in fact, let's probably do this here. Let's check for this. Is appointment available, something like that. And we can now use this now into the next node where we're going to actually make that decision on whether we return back a positive or a more negative result back into FlutterFlow. So we'll move on to the next node now. Okay, so we now need to create a node here that's going to now send us into two different directions depending on the result of our is appointment available. So hit the little plus here, select that, and then we want to choose a branch node here. So just select that and say add node. And then now, of course, what we need to select true here. And then what we're going to do is we're then going to just press the little pen. And we now want to just select this here. We want to delete that out because we now need to apply the result of is appointment available. Now we know that's going to return back a true or a false. So just choose the little variables here, and we're going to choose the one here where it says is appointment available. Select that and just click away. So we now know if this is true, we're going to head into this particular direction. Of course, if it's false, we're going to end up in this particular direction here. So that all sets us up quite nicely now to simply now build out the next set of nodes to return back either that positive or that negative result back to FlutterFlow. So here I am back in FlutterFlow just to give you a quick update to kind of how we would be dealing with the responses coming back from FlutterFlow. Now, typically this is the scenario that you'll probably find with inside most FlutterFlow applications where you would make a kind of an API call, you would then have this kind of result that you would then be checking for. Now, of course, if you get a 200 back as status 200, you will typically move in this particular direction. Now, this normally typically always represents a more positive result. Of course, if it's anything outside of a 200 result that comes back, you'd head in this particular direction. And as you can see here, I've got like an information dialog to be displayed. And of course, here in the positive result, I'll then go on and do what else I need to do with inside my FlutterFlow application. So we need to almost replicate this but with inside BuildShip itself, and the way we do that is we actually create some return nodes. We need to create a return node here for the 200, and we're going to create another return node here for the status 400 on this particular side. So let's hit the little plus here, let's click on the return, let's add the node in there, and let's now choose this as a 400. It's a bad request. Just going to scroll that down a little bit, and I'm going to hit the little pen, and this is where we now need to be quite standard about the way that we return back an API result back to our FlutterFlow application. So I always like to keep my API results quite standard. So I'm just going to choose the JavaScript option here. Now, the reason why I need to choose JavaScript is because we want to make sure that the header for the response that comes back to FlutterFlow is actually of a content type JSON. By saying text, you're just going to get a plain text response. Now that won't be interpreted by FlutterFlow in the right way, so you need to make sure you choose JavaScript. Now I'm just going to choose the opening curly braces there. You can see that I've got these kind of these brackets that's been added. I'm pretty sure this is a bit of a quirk with inside BuildShip, but don't worry about those. I'll probably be removed at the time that you might be doing this yourself or watching the recording, but it doesn't have any issue to the output that we're actually having with inside this particular node. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type in double quotes and status, do a colon, and I'm just going to say this is error, like that. Do a comma, and I'm going to do a message that's going to come back, and of course this message is going to be appointments not found, something like that. Now it means I can hook onto this now with inside FlutterFlow and show that particular message. As I mentioned before in the alert dialog box, I could do that. So that's all that I need to do there. Now in the actual the more positive scenario, now we need to do another return node itself. Just hit the return here and hit add node, and of course this is going to be of status type 200. All pretty good. I'm going to have to keep scrolling this down, so keep flicking down, and then we're just going to hit the little pen here. Let's now do the same thing as we did before. So just choose the JavaScript here, and then we're just going to do the actual opening brackets there, and then the curly braces, and then let's just do the same thing again. This time I'm going to put a status of OK, something like that. Not that I'm going to use that with inside me FlutterFlow application. I'm just going to put an empty message in here with inside the double quotes, but this is the important bit. We're going to return back the result. So let's just do a colon there, and I'm going to go to my variables, and I'm going to go to my get appointment. This is the Supabase response that comes back. Choose get appointment. So of course this is now going to put that in here. I only want to return back the single sort of item, because if you remember the actual Supabase get appointment returns back a list. We only want to return back the very first one in that particular list. Now there's only going to be one anyway, but it's going to be an array, but we just want to pull the first one out, and that's all that we need to do. So that is all pretty well much all set up quite nicely for us now. What we now need to do obviously is now test this. We can now test the whole workflow within BuildShip just to make sure that we've got what we need. I'm going to need to go back to FlutterFlow and get an updated token, because the token that I might have had previously is probably expired. So I'm going to go and grab that now, and then we'll be ready to give this a test. Okay, so let's move into test mode then. So we're going to test the whole workflow here. Now up the top here, we got this option called test, which is fantastic. Just choose test. And this will now allow us to kind of almost simulate exactly what FlutterFlow is doing for us when it actually makes these actual requests. So if you remember back to the beginning of the video, this is the body that we got coming in. This is the post request from FlutterFlow. I'm just going to actually create this now. So I'm going to put my curly brackets in there, and I'm just going to say a staff ID. Okay, like that with a lowercase there, and just do this as a 1. So that's all that we're passing in from FlutterFlow. And of course, I need to move over to the actual headers as well, because I need to pass in the authorization. So I'm just going to paste an updated bearer token. If you remember, this is kind of what you need to pull from. In my instance, I pulled this from Google Chrome. I've just logged into my application and I just pulled this. I'm just going to hit the test workflow. Now, what I'm hoping to see now is this result coming back. Hopefully first time. If not, we'll see if we can correct some problems if they come up. Okay, so that's looking really positive, almost first time there. You can see here that we've kind of got the JSON response come back. You can see this is our single result as part of our result of 200. So that is looking really, really good. So we now need to also test this now to see if there is actually any non-available appointments. Now we can do that quite simply actually, because what we can do is we can actually change the body, and we can change this maybe to a staff member that doesn't have any. Now I do know in my database that staff ID 3 doesn't actually have any future appointments. Okay, so if I test that workflow, hopefully we'll get that back. There we go, got that error and appointments not found. So things are looking really good now. So I can actually now hook onto this with inside FlutterFlow, and I'm good to go. So you can also see here that we've got some kind of like little green symbols here that's representing kind of like the kind of the test mode. If I actually hit that, you can see here that I've kind of got like a date there. I can get the appointment. I can see that I've got no results back. If I were to go back into the test mode again, and I was to go back to the body, and I was to change that to, let's say, a 1 there. Let's test that workflow again. Okay, you can see I've got a positive result back there. I can go back over to this, of course, and I can see that actually in here. So what's really nice about that is you can really debug kind of like your workflows as they kind of play out, so you can kind of spot. So when you get to some quite complex workflows, you can really sort of hopefully narrow down into where the actual problem was. So yeah, so that's it. So that's the result. This all being done there. The workflow's been executed here. So I'm now ready to actually hook onto this with inside my FlutterFlow application. Now, I'm not going to do that in this particular video, because here I'm trying to explain exactly how you can break out into something like BuildShip to actually make these business decisions and then move it back into FlutterFlow. So of course, finally, once all your workflow is all up and running, all you need to do is hit that button up the top there and hit ship there. That will deploy it and then return you back then a URL which you can then use with inside your FlutterFlow project. Okay, so there it is. It's all nice, and I can now copy this here, of course, and put it to the clipboard. Incidentally, if you need to access it at another point instead of there, you can then press on this little option here and it will show you what you need there. So you can just copy that now. You can move back over to FlutterFlow. Let me show you what that looks like. So here I've got this group that's been created here. You can paste the API URL in there without the /find appointment. You need to make sure that you've got your header in here. This is the bearer token, the one that I created earlier on. So I've just made sure I've typed that out just like that, and then what I've done is I've then created a group variable called token, which I can pass in the actual token from within inside FlutterFlow actually into every single request that gets made. So that's what I've got set up here. Now of course then I've got the find appointment, which is the specific kind of call out to BuildShip, and you can see here I've got /find appointment. With my variables, I've got one here called staff ID. If you remember, that's what we've been using, which is just an integer that's passed in. And then here's my body that's just been set up. You can see here, this is very similar to what we've been doing with inside the test. So I've got that passed in. That's all done. And I can then invoke that then from within inside my application, which will then call out to BuildShip. And then I'll get that response back. And then I can do something with that specific response within inside my application. So just very quickly, I know I'm going to get asked this question with inside the comments of this video, so let me quickly cover it now. So here is the API call that I'm actually making. I need to pass in the token. This is the authenticated user with inside my application, the token. So how do I get that? It's really, really simple in FlutterFlow. Here is the value, here is the action that's selected. You can see here, this is the variable that I'm looking to populate. I'll just click on the little selector. I'm going to move over to authenticated user, and I just need to select this one down here, this ID token, JWT token. Once that's in there, then we're going to get that bearer token that's going to be passed down into BuildShip. So I just thought I'd quickly cover that just in case you weren't sure about where that was. So there you go. Hopefully you enjoyed this particular video. It's super fun building a workflow with inside a BuildShip as well, just to be able to then make those business level decisions, which I can then do on the server, and then I can pass those responses back to the front end for really that front end to do what it needs to do from a presentation perspective. Please do drop a like on this video. Really do appreciate it. It gets it out to the FlutterFlow and BuildShip community so they can enjoy this content as well. And of course, please do subscribe to the channel because there's going to be so much more coming in the future with using FlutterFlow and BuildShip together. So there we go. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.